The day I decided to pretend to be asleep, I wasn't testing loyalty. I was searching for proof that kindness hadn't disappeared from the world. I had built an empire where every smile carried a price tag and every promise came wrapped in hidden motives. Men twice my age lowered their voices when I entered a room. Rivals measured every word, knowing one careless sentence could cost them fortunes. Yet none of that silence ever felt as heavy as the one inside my own home. The Moretti estate overlooked nearly 40 acres of rolling hills outside New York City, a mansion large enough to echo with footsteps that belonged to people who never truly lived there. Every morning began the same. Security briefings. Phone calls. Meetings. Numbers. Contracts. More numbers. My staff performed their duties with flawless precision, but nobody lingered. Nobody laughed. Nobody forgot themselves for even a second. They feared me too much for that. 3 weeks earlier, my longtime housekeeper had retired after nearly 20 years. She deserved the rest. My chief of staff hired someone new while I was away on business. Her name was Grace Walker, a quiet woman in her early 30s who had glowing references but little else. Widowed, according to the file. Raising a 6-year-old daughter alone. Reliable. Honest. Never late. I barely glanced at the paperwork before signing it. Employees came and went. It wasn't my habit to learn their stories. But this morning, my routine shifted without warning. Mr. Moretti, my head of security said carefully. Ms. Walker called before sunrise. Her babysitter cancelled. She asked if she could bring her daughter for just today. She said she'll leave immediately if it's a problem. I stared out the bedroom window as rain painted silver trails across the glass. Somewhere below, the front gates opened. A small sedan rolled slowly up the long driveway, looking almost fragile beside the stone fountains and towering oak trees. How old is the little girl? I asked. 6, sir. 6. Young enough to tell the truth without realizing it. Young enough not to care about reputations, money, or power. An idea settled quietly into my mind. Tell everyone to continue as usual, I said. And no one is to mention who I am. My security chief hesitated. Sir? I want to see them exactly as they are. 5 minutes later, I dismissed everyone from the second floor, loosened my tie, lay back across the king-sized bed, and closed my eyes. My breathing slowed until it became steady, almost effortless. Outside my bedroom door, the mansion carried on with its familiar rhythm. Vacuum cleaners hummed in distant hallways. Crystal glasses clinked softly somewhere downstairs. Then I heard something different. Tiny footsteps. Light. Curious. Unafraid. They paused outside my half-open door, followed by the gentle whisper of a little girl's voice. Mommy, is that the man who's sick? Another voice answered softly. Warm. Protective. Don't stare, sweetheart. Let's finish our work first. Their footsteps continued down the hallway, but for reasons I couldn't explain, I found myself hoping they would come back. I listened as the quiet rhythm of housekeeping drifted through the hallway, every sound unusually clear because I was paying attention for the first time in years. Grace moved carefully, never rushing, never dragging furniture across polished hardwood floors the way some workers did. Cabinet doors closed gently instead of slamming. Picture frames were dusted before being placed back exactly where they belong. She treated the house as though it belonged to someone she respected instead of someone she feared. That difference caught my attention long before I ever opened my eyes. A few minutes later, I heard another set of footsteps wandering in a slower pattern. Small shoes. Curious pauses. The soft scrape of tiny fingertips against the hallway wall. Lily was exploring. She stopped outside my room again. This time she did not speak immediately. I could almost feel her standing there, trying to decide whether she should come inside. Finally she whispered, barely louder than the rain tapping against the windows. He still looks tired. Grace answered from farther down the hall. Lily, remember what we talked about. We never bother people when they are resting. I know, Mommy. Her voice carried the innocent disappointment. Only children could manage. I just wanted to see if he was okay. He has doctors for that. Doctors cannot stay all day. A long silence followed. Then Grace laughed quietly, the first genuine laugh I had heard inside this mansion in months. It was not loud or dramatic. Just warm enough to soften the cold marble walls around us. "Come help me downstairs," she said. "I need my best assistant." Tiny footsteps hurried away, followed by cheerful giggles that seemed completely out of place inside a house built on discipline and routine. I remained perfectly still, but something about those sounds lingered. They reminded me of another lifetime, before every conversation became a negotiation and every visitor arrived with an agenda. Nearly an hour passed before they returned to the second floor carrying fresh towels. Grace folded linens with practiced efficiency while quietly explaining each task to Lily. "Corners first," she said. "If you do the little things carefully, the big things usually take care of themselves." "Like puzzles?" Lily asked. "Exactly like puzzles. Can I fold one?" "You can try." The towel landed unevenly, followed by a dramatic sigh. "Mine looks funny." "Funny is how people learn." Grace kissed the top of her daughter's head before fixing the towel without making her feel embarrassed. I realized then that she never raised her voice. She corrected with patience instead of frustration. It was a rare kind of strength. Suddenly there was a soft thump outside my bedroom. Something small had fallen. Grace gasped. "Lily, stay there. I will grab another basket." Her footsteps disappeared toward the laundry room. The hallway grew quiet again. Then, almost cautiously, the tiny footsteps approached my door for the third time that morning. They stopped just inside the room. I could hear Lily breathing as she studied me from only a few feet away. "You must be really lonely," she whispered so softly I almost believed I imagined it. "Big houses are too quiet." I kept my breathing steady, refusing to move. Then I heard the faint rustle of fabric as she gently picked up the cashmere throw that had slipped from the foot of my bed. A second later, careful little hands laid it across my legs with surprising tenderness, making sure it covered my feet completely before she whispered one last sentence that settled somewhere deep inside a heart I had spent years convincing myself no longer existed. "Mommy says everybody sleeps better when they know somebody cares." Grace returned before I expected, carrying another basket of freshly folded linens balanced carefully against her hip. I heard her stop abruptly at the bedroom door. For one suspended moment, neither of them spoke. Then she exhaled quietly, not with anger, but with gentle concern. "Lily," she whispered. "What did we talk about?" "I know," Lily answered in a tiny voice. "I was not waking him up. You still should not come into someone's room without permission. I only fixed his blanket because it fell." There was another brief silence before Grace sighed again. "Come here." Small footsteps crossed the hardwood floor. I imagined Grace kneeling in front of her daughter because her next words sounded closer to the ground. "Sweetheart, having a kind heart is wonderful. Never lose that. But kindness also means respecting people's space. Even when they look lonely?" The innocence behind the question settled over the room more heavily than any accusation ever had. Grace answered slowly, choosing every word with care. "Especially then. Sometimes people need quiet before they are ready to let someone in." Lily thought about that for several seconds. "Do you think he has any friends?" "I do not know." "Do you think anyone reads him bedtime stories?" Grace let out another soft laugh. "I think grown-ups usually read their own books." "That sounds sad." I almost smiled despite myself. After they left, the room felt strangely empty again. The blanket still rested neatly across my legs, tucked in with more care than any member of my household had shown me in years. Most people around me assumed expensive things mattered most because they always had. They adjusted paintings worth hundreds of thousands of dollars without noticing whether I had eaten lunch. They memorized my schedule but never asked if I had slept well. Somewhere along the way, efficiency had replaced humanity inside these walls. Nearly 30 minutes later, another unexpected sound drifted upstairs. Soft humming. Lily was singing to herself while coloring in one of the sitting rooms across the hall. The melody wandered without perfect rhythm, the way children sang when they were happy enough not to care about getting every note right. Grace continued cleaning nearby while quietly dusting bookshelves. "Mommy?" Lily asked. "Yes? Why do people build such big houses?" "Different reasons. If I had one this big, I would invite lots of people over." "Would you?" "Nobody should eat dinner alone." Those words landed with surprising force. I had eaten alone more nights than I could count. Formal dining room. 12 chairs. One occupied. Silence filling the other 11 places. My staff stood nearby if I needed anything, but conversation was never part of the service. Somewhere downstairs, the grandfather clock chimed noon. Grace gathered her supplies. "Time for our lunch break." "Can we eat outside?" Lily asked excitedly. "If the rain stops." "Can we bring extra sandwiches?" Grace sounded amused. "For who?" "Maybe the birds are hungry too." Their voices faded as they walked toward the kitchen. I remained motionless, but my attention refused to leave them. I had begun this morning believing I was studying two strangers. Instead, every passing minute made me feel as though they were quietly revealing everything I had forgotten about ordinary life. For years I had trusted background checks, financial reports, and carefully prepared recommendations to judge a person's character. Yet none of those papers could have told me what one little girl had already shown me in less than a single morning. Kindness was never announced. It simply appeared in the smallest moments, expecting absolutely nothing in return. The rain finally eased into a gentle mist sometime after lunch, and the mansion settled into the kind of peaceful silence that usually made me restless. Today it felt different. Today every quiet moment carried the possibility of another small surprise. I heard Grace organizing supplies downstairs while Lily entertained herself with crayons she had brought from home. Every few minutes her cheerful voice floated through the hallways, asking questions only a child would think to ask. Why were the ceilings so tall? Did the fireplace ever get lonely in the summer? Who watered the flowers when it snowed? The staff answered politely whenever they crossed paths with her, and to my surprise they sounded lighter than usual. Even people who had worked for me for years seemed unable to resist smiling around her. Then came another stretch of silence. A few moments later, tiny footsteps returned to the second floor. They stopped outside my bedroom before continuing inside with extraordinary care. She believed I was still asleep. I kept my breathing slow and steady. I heard something soft being placed on the nightstand. Then the quiet splash of water inside a porcelain bowl. Lily had somehow found a small washcloth from the guest bathroom across the hall. She dipped it carefully into the water and wrung it out with both hands, struggling because the cloth was almost too large for her little fingers. I felt the faintest touch against my forehead. Cool. Gentle. So gentle that it almost broke the careful mask I had worn all morning. "Mommy says cool cloths help when people feel bad," she whispered. "I hope this makes you feel better." She paused as though expecting an answer. When none came, she continued talking anyway, the way children often did with people they trusted. "Sometimes I pretend to sleep too. Mommy still kisses my forehead because she thinks I do not notice." My chest tightened. No negotiation. No hidden purpose. Just honesty spoken into a room she believed belonged to silence. She carefully folded the washcloth again before placing it neatly beside the bowl. Then I heard the faint rustle of paper. Curious, I listened as crayons rolled across the wooden nightstand. She was drawing something. Every few seconds she stopped to think before coloring again. Finally she whispered proudly, "There. Now you have company." I wanted more than anything to open my eyes, but I stayed perfectly still. A minute later Grace's footsteps approached quickly. "Lily?" she called softly. "Where are you?" "In here." Grace appeared at the doorway and immediately lowered her voice. "Sweetheart, I have been looking everywhere. I made him something." "Oh?" He looked lonely again. Grace walked closer. Even without seeing her face, I could hear emotion settling into her voice. That is very thoughtful. Do you think he will like it? I think anyone would. Even if they never smile? Grace answered without hesitation. Especially then. Lily yawned, exhausted from the excitement of the day. Grace lifted her into her arms. Come on. You need a little nap before we finish. Can you leave the picture here? Of course. Their footsteps slowly faded down the hallway until the mansion became quiet once more. I waited another full minute before allowing myself the smallest movement. I opened my eyes and turned toward the nightstand. Leaning against the lamp was a drawing made with uneven crayons. 3 stick figures stood beneath a bright yellow sun. One little girl held the hand of a smiling woman. On the other side stood a tall man wearing an oversized blue suit. Above all 3 figures, written in careful block letters, were the words, "Nobody has to be alone." I stared at that simple drawing for what felt like forever, realizing it had accomplished something that years of wealth, influence, and success never had. It made the biggest room in my house feel just a little less empty. For several long minutes I remained exactly where I was, the drawing still resting against the lamp as afternoon light filtered through the rain-speckled windows. I had negotiated multimillion-dollar agreements without losing focus. I had spent endless nights studying financial reports until sunrise. Yet I could not stop looking at a picture drawn with crooked crayons by a 6-year-old who had known me for less than a day. My chest felt strangely heavy. Not painful. Just unfamiliar. I reached toward the paper with slower hands than I could ever remember using. The yellow sun stretched beyond the edges of the page. The 3 smiling figures stood close together, their hands connected by uneven lines that refused to separate. There were no expensive cars. No mansion. No symbols of success. Just people. Somewhere along the way, I had forgotten that children measured wealth differently. To Lily, having someone beside you mattered more than having everything else. A quiet knock interrupted my thoughts. Sir? It was Daniel, my chief of security. I folded the drawing carefully before answering. Come in. He stepped inside with his usual disciplined posture, but the moment his eyes landed on the picture in my hands, his expression shifted ever so slightly. Everything all right, sir? Did you know she came in here? We saw it on the hallway cameras. And? No one wanted to interrupt. I studied him for a moment. Daniel had worked beside me for nearly 12 years. Nothing surprised him anymore. At least, that was what I had always believed. What did you think? I asked. He hesitated, searching for the right words. Honestly, sir? Always. I think she treated you like a person instead of a powerful man. The room became very quiet. He was right. Every visitor who entered this estate arrived carrying expectations. Business partners wanted favors. Investors wanted reassurance. Politicians wanted influence. Even charitable organizations often wanted photographs more than help. Lily had wanted none of those things. She had simply worried that a stranger might feel lonely. Daniel cleared his throat gently. Would you like me to remove the drawing? My answer came before I had time to think. No. Even I sounded surprised by how quickly I had spoken. Leave it exactly where it is. He nodded once. Very well, sir. Before leaving, he paused at the doorway. The little girl also left something else. What? She asked one of the kitchen staff whether soup helps people recover faster. I looked up. Soup? Yes, sir. She wanted to make sure dinner would help you feel better. Daniel allowed the smallest smile before quietly closing the door behind him. I sat there alone again, staring out across the rain-covered gardens. The fountain outside continued spilling water into the stone basin below, steady and predictable, just as it had every day for years. Everything around me remained exactly the same, yet the mansion somehow felt different. Warmer. Lived in. Human. For the first time in longer than I cared to admit, I found myself wondering about someone else's life instead of protecting my own. Who had taught Grace to raise a child with so much compassion despite carrying the weight of raising her alone? How many sacrifices had gone unnoticed behind that calm smile? How many evenings had Lily fallen asleep believing tomorrow would somehow be better simply because her mother promised it would? Questions replaced assumptions. Curiosity replaced indifference. I finally reached for my phone and pressed a single button. Daniel answered immediately. Yes, sir? I looked once more at the little drawing before speaking. I want a complete background report on Grace Walker. There was a brief pause. Everything? I glanced toward the hallway where tiny footsteps had echoed only an hour earlier. Everything, I replied softly. But this time, I am not looking for reasons to distrust someone. I am looking for reasons they deserved better than life gave them. Daniel arrived before sunset carrying a slim black folder instead of speaking over the phone. That alone told me he had taken my request personally. He placed the file on the desk beside the drawing without saying a word. For a long moment I looked at both objects resting side by side. One represented facts. The other represented something facts could never fully explain. I opened the folder first. Grace Walker. 32 years old. Born in Columbus, Ohio. Widowed 4 years earlier after her husband, a volunteer firefighter, passed away following complications from injuries sustained during a rescue operation. No lawsuits. No criminal record. Excellent work history despite changing jobs frequently. The reason became obvious by the third page. Every move had been made for Lily. Better schools. Lower rent. Safer neighborhoods. Flexible work schedules. Every decision pointed in one direction. Her daughter. There were copies of employment evaluations from hotels, private homes, and housekeeping agencies. Every supervisor described her with nearly identical words. Honest. Dependable. Humble. Never complains. Always helps others before being asked. One handwritten note from an elderly employer caught my attention more than the formal reports. Grace stayed 3 extra hours after every shift during my chemotherapy treatments. She refused additional pay because she said no one should face difficult days alone. I read the sentence twice before setting the page down. Daniel remained quietly by the window, allowing me time to think. What about finances? I finally asked. Tight, he answered. Very tight. She works 6 days a week. Most of her income goes toward rent, school expenses, and medical insurance. According to our research, she has not purchased anything unnecessary in over 3 years. Dead? Only ordinary household expenses. She pays every bill on time. I nodded slowly. And Lily? For the first time that afternoon, Daniel smiled. Her teachers describe her as unusually kind. He handed me another page. Last winter she gave away her new winter coat to another student because she believed that little boy looked colder than she did. I lowered the paper without realizing I had been holding my breath. What happened then? Grace quietly bought another coat from a thrift store and never told the school what her daughter had done. The room fell silent again. Outside, the clouds had finally begun to break apart, allowing warm evening sunlight to spill across the gardens. Golden light reflected through the windows, illuminating the crayon drawing still standing beside my lamp. Suddenly I understood something I had completely missed. Lily had not become kind by accident. She had been watching kindness every single day of her life. Grace had taught her without speeches, without rewards, without expecting recognition. Daniel reached into the folder one final time. There is one more thing. He placed a photograph in front of me. Grace and Lily stood outside a modest apartment building holding 2 grocery bags. They were both laughing about something the camera could not capture. Their clothes were simple. Their shoes were worn. Yet neither face carried the exhaustion I expected. They looked peaceful. When was this taken? I asked. Last Saturday, Daniel replied. Our investigators said they stopped halfway home because Lily wanted to feed breadcrumbs to ducks at a small pond. They stayed nearly 40 minutes. I studied the photograph carefully. People with very little often hurried through life because every minute mattered. Yet somehow they had still found time to make room for joy. I looked back toward the hallway where I had first heard those tiny footsteps that morning. My test had ended hours ago, but the answers kept arriving. I had expected to discover whether Grace and Lily could be trusted inside my home. Instead, every page in front of me revealed a far more uncomfortable truth. They were not the ones being tested anymore. I was. The next morning I did not pretend to be asleep. Instead, I watched the security monitors from my private office, something I rarely did unless there was a specific concern. 8 small screens displayed different parts of the estate. The front entrance, the gardens, the kitchen, the library. One camera overlooked the staff hallway where Grace had already begun her routine. She greeted every employee by name, thanking the gardener for carrying a heavy supply box before he even offered to help her. The kindness in the reports had not been exaggerated. It simply existed in every ordinary moment. On another screen, Lily sat at the long breakfast table reserved for staff, carefully coloring the back of an old grocery receipt because, as she had told one of the cooks, the front already did its job. Even scraps became opportunities in her hands. "You have been watching those cameras for 23 minutes," Daniel observed quietly from the doorway. "That is probably a personal record." I almost smiled. "Has anything unusual happened?" "Only one thing." He handed me a small note from the gatehouse. "A man came looking for Grace before she arrived this morning." I looked up immediately. "Who?" "His name is Brian Keller. According to our research, he rented the apartment next to Grace about a year ago." "What did he want?" "He said he only wished to return a package that had been delivered to the wrong address." Daniel paused briefly before continuing. "Our guards politely informed him that employees' personal information is never shared. He left without causing any trouble." I nodded, but something about the report unsettled me. "Run another background check." "Already in progress." The morning continued peacefully until shortly after noon. Grace was trimming flowers near the west terrace while Lily sat on a nearby bench reading a library book aloud to herself, giving every character a different voice. Several members of the gardening staff slowed their work just to listen, pretending they were still busy while smiling at her dramatic storytelling. Then another vehicle approached the front gate. Daniel's phone vibrated almost instantly. He answered, listened for less than 30 seconds, then looked toward me. "The same man is back." My attention shifted to the monitors showing the entrance. A modest pickup truck waited outside the gates. Through the camera I could see a middle-aged man holding a small cardboard box. Nothing about his posture appeared threatening. If anything, he looked nervous. "What is he saying?" I asked. Daniel listened through the security earpiece connected to the gate officers. "He insists the package belongs to Lily. He says it contains one of her school projects that was delivered by mistake." I watched silently as one of my guards accepted the box but refused to allow the visitor onto the property. The truck slowly turned around and disappeared down the road. "Verify everything," I said. 20 minutes later the answer came back. The package really had been delivered incorrectly several days earlier. Inside was a handmade paper bird that Lily had created in school along with a note from her teacher praising her for helping another student feel welcome on the first day of class. Grace opened the box during her lunch break, and Lily clapped her hands with excitement before hugging the paper bird as though it were priceless. "I thought it was lost forever," she whispered. Grace smiled and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "Sometimes good things simply take the long way home." Watching them, I realized how easily suspicion had become my first instinct. I had expected hidden motives because that was the world I understood. Yet once again, the truth had been far simpler. A neighbor had merely wanted to return something that belonged to a little girl. And somehow, without saying a single word to me directly, Grace and Lily continued teaching lessons I should have learned many years ago. By the end of the week, the mansion no longer sounded the way it had before Grace and Lily arrived. The walls were still covered with priceless artwork. The marble floors still reflected the afternoon sunlight. The clock still chimed with perfect precision. Yet something invisible had changed. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful. I finally understood there was a difference. On Friday evening I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. Ask Grace to meet me in the library before she leaves, I told Daniel. He raised an eyebrow but asked no questions. 20 minutes later there was a gentle knock. Mr. Moretti? Grace stepped inside, standing respectfully near the doorway. You wanted to see me? This was the first real conversation we had ever shared. She looked exactly as she always did. Simple gray sweater. Hair tied neatly back. Hands showing the faint signs of honest work. There was no fear in her eyes, only professionalism. Please have a seat, I said. She hesitated for a second before sitting carefully across from me. Have I done something wrong? She asked quietly. I looked at the drawing that still rested on the bookshelf beside my desk. No, I answered. Quite the opposite. She followed my eyes until she noticed the colorful picture. Recognition spread across her face almost immediately. Oh no, she whispered, covering her mouth with one hand. Lily left that in your room. She did. Grace closed her eyes for a brief moment, clearly embarrassed. I am so sorry. I told her she should not enter private rooms without permission. I promise it will never happen again. Grace. She looked back at me. You do not need to apologize. Confusion replaced embarrassment. I do not understand. I took a slow breath, realizing this conversation was far more difficult than any business negotiation I had ever handled. The first day you came here, I admitted, I was not actually asleep. Her expression froze. She stared at me without speaking as the meaning settled in. You were pretending? Yes. You heard everything? I nodded once. Every word. The color drained from her face. Lily touched your blanket. She put a washcloth on your forehead. She talked to you. She did. Grace lowered her eyes. I cannot believe this. Neither could I. She looked up again, this time with quiet disappointment instead of confusion. You tested us. There was no anger in her voice. Somehow that made the words even harder to hear. Yes, I admitted. I did. Why? I searched for an answer worthy of the question, but none of my usual explanations sounded acceptable anymore. Finally I spoke the truth. Because I stopped believing people could be kind without wanting something in return. Grace remained silent for several seconds before asking softly, And what did my daughter want from you? I felt my throat tighten. Nothing. Exactly. She stood slowly, smoothing the sleeves of her sweater. Children do not calculate kindness, Mr. Moretti. They simply notice who looks like they need it. Those words stayed between us like sunlight filling a quiet room. I looked down at the drawing once more before meeting her eyes again. Grace, I said, my voice lower than I intended, I owe both of you an apology. She studied me carefully, perhaps deciding whether the man sitting across from her was the same distant employer she had met only days before. Then, with the calm wisdom that seemed to define everything about her, she offered the smallest smile. The important thing is not that you made a mistake, she said gently. It is what kind of person you choose to become after you recognize it. 3 months passed more quickly than I expected. Seasons began changing, and so did I. Every Friday afternoon, Lily still arrived carrying a backpack almost as big as she was, always greeting every member of the staff before she came inside. Somehow she remembered everyone's name. She asked the gardeners how their flowers were growing. She thanked the cooks before they served lunch. She waved at the security team as though they were old friends instead of men trained to remain expressionless. Little by little, the estate transformed around her. Employees who once hurried silently through endless hallways now lingered for conversations. Fresh flowers appeared in rooms that had never needed them before. The dining table that had seated only one person for years slowly became a place where laughter occasionally echoed against the high ceilings. One evening I found Lily sitting in the library, her legs dangling from an oversized chair while she carefully read one of the children's books I had ordered after noticing there had never been a single one in the house. She looked up when I entered. Mr. Moretti? Yes? Do you remember the picture I drew? I smiled before I realized I was doing it. I remember every crayon. Her blue eyes brightened. Do you still have it? Instead of answering, I walked to my desk and opened the top drawer. The paper was protected inside a simple wooden frame now, resting where I could see it every morning. Lily's mouth opened in surprise. You kept it? I did. She climbed down from the chair and stood beside me, looking proudly at the faded yellow sun and the 3 smiling figures. I almost threw it away because the hands looked funny. Those hands are my favorite part, I replied. Why? I looked at the uneven lines connecting the 3 people together. Because they reminded me that no one is meant to carry life alone. Lily nodded as though that had always been obvious. Mommy says hearts grow stronger when they have someone to hold on to. At that moment Grace appeared in the doorway, ready to leave for the evening. Lily, it is time to go. She thanked me politely as she always did, but before they reached the front entrance I heard myself call her name. Both of them turned around. Grace, I said, starting next month, your work schedule will be reduced to 4 days each week with full pay. Her eyes widened. Mr. Moretti, I cannot accept charity. It is not charity, I answered gently. It is time. She looked confused. Time? Time for you to have more afternoons with your daughter before she grows up. Grace's eyes filled with quiet emotion. She tried to speak but could not find the words. Lily solved the problem for both of them. She ran forward and wrapped her small arms around my waist without asking permission, just as naturally as she had tucked a blanket around someone she believed was sleeping months earlier. Thank you, she whispered. I carefully returned the hug, realizing that somewhere between pretending to sleep and learning to wake up, my life had changed forever. After they drove away that evening, I stood alone on the front steps watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and amber. The mansion behind me was still enormous. My responsibilities had not disappeared. The world outside those gates remained just as complicated as before. But one little girl had proven something I never thought possible. Power could build walls. Money could fill rooms. Respect could command silence. Yet only kindness could make a house feel like a home. And in the end, the greatest lesson I ever learned did not come from the empire I spent decades building. It came from the smallest hands that quietly reminded me nobody has to be alone.